Hi, y'all. I'm Colin McDowell, and today we will be learning about the monitor hypothesis. That's what my presentation is on. So let's just jump right in. First off, to know about the monitor hypothesis, we have to know about Stephen Krashen and his theories of language acquisition. These are all hypotheses: acquisition learning hypotheses, natural order, monitor hypothesis, input hypothesis, effective filter hypothesis. All of these are 5 different hypotheses that Stephen Krashen created in order to better explain second language learning. The monitor hypothesis is very closely linked with the acquisition learning hypothesis, which we'll go over. So, first things first, who is Stephen Krashen? To understand the monitor hypothesis, we first must answer who Stephen Krashen is. Who's this guy that came up with it? Why is he important? Why is it important? So, Stephen Krashen was a linguistics student at the University of South California. He is now one of their emeritus professors and still lives in California. Emeritus means that he is no longer currently teaching. However, he is still awarded the title of professor for his accolades to the study that he is in, which is in this case linguistics. In 1982, he released a book called The Principles and Practice in Second Language Acquisition, which is where he came out with the monitor hypothesis, along with the acquisition learning hypothesis. He has a total of 400 publications. Not all of these are books. Most of these are things that he has helped along with or helped write, mostly, and again, the study of second language learning, linguistics. So yeah, why he's an emeritus professor. So, what is the monitor hypothesis? The monitor hypothesis claims that all language is learned through monitoring, right? The monitor hypothesis means that when we watch what we say, as the words come out of my mouth, we pause and we listen to ourselves speak, and we try to correct ourselves as we speak, right? So this means we learn language subconsciously, right? Like in the language acquisition hypothesis we mentioned earlier, but we learn language from its use. So we learn vocabulary, how words relate, and all that stuff we just kind of get subconsciously. But we don't really learn the grammatical structure, how to formulate sentences, how to really use the language. You'll learn all of that through monitoring, right? That's what this monitoring hypothesis claims. Right? When we use the language, we're going to be monitoring our own speech. We're going to be slowing ourselves down and correcting ourselves. It can be seen if we got caught up in our own words, like I did earlier. We have to stop, take a breath, and better watch what we say. And through that process, we learn how to use the language. And then I have the hypothesis, right? This hypothesis states that we learn language through that monitoring of our use of the language and correcting ourselves, right? By pausing, taking that second to think, that's how we are learning the language. There are also some things that the monitor hypothesis needs to function, right? Like we said, it needs that acquisition piece. It needs that subconscious piece, right? What are the other things it might need, right? Other than just that language acquisition, we need sufficient time. It can't be timed too heavily, or else you won't be able to take that step back and really think about the words you're saying. So you need sufficient time. You need to focus on the form, right? You need to focus on the grammar. This is how we learn grammar, not necessarily all vocabulary, because that's all subconscious. We are learning the grammar, the structure, how to formulate proper sentences. And for that, we need to focus on form. And lastly, we need the knowledge of the rules, right? You can correct yourself, but that only works is if you're correcting yourself in the right direction, which means you need to know what some of the rules are, at least, to be able to correct yourself correctly. um, but to be able to correct yourself correctly like that, you need to have the knowledge of the rules, or at least have someone teaching you the knowledge for the rules. So now that we've learned a lot about the monitor hypothesis and its strengths and why we think it's a good idea, let's look at two of the critiques for this hypothesis, right? So there's two main critiques that I have found for this hypothesis, this theory, right? Separating language acquisition from language learning, some researchers would say is impossible. For example, right, using and learning language go hand in hand. So like the way I use language and the way I learn language, they're like this. They're inseparable, right? So to try to separate those two and say that all learning, all of it is happening outside of the acquisition is kind of difficult. It's kind of like the idea of like the subconscious, right? I'm saying like, oh, the subconscious, the vocabulary is just there. It's about the rules, and well, a lot of people would argue, well, learning the language requires us to learn the vocab, or requires us to um, go outside and do all these other things, and it's not just the use where learning is happening. There's other learning happening elsewhere. Um, the other big critique to this theory is how do we speak first, right? Kind of similar on that language acquisition, right? But a little bit different in the fact that we need to first formulate a sentence, right? To monitor that output that we have, to monitor what we are saying and to correct ourselves, first, we need to just create something, and it can't just be gibberish because there has to be something to correct, right? It can't just be nonsense. Um, and that is also another critique, because to have that information, to have that ability to build these sentences takes some form of prior learning. It would be the critique. Um, and that means that learning, again, is being done outside of this monitoring. But those are the two main critiques, and I think they're valid, but I think so is the monitor hypothesis. I think both can still be valid and true. So next, what I would like us to look at is an activity. Yay, activity time. Um, on the next slide, there is some text. What I want you to do as the watcher is to pause me and read it out loud. Just read the text out loud, best of your ability. No rules, nothing like that, and this isn't graded. Just read the text out loud, and then unpause it, and we'll go over it together. So let's take a look at that next slide. I'm going to pause for a second, let you read it out loud. Okay, hopefully you've paused me. You've read it out loud. And what you've probably found is that there are some mistakes in this text. And that these mistakes can make it difficult to read this text, especially out loud. That's for a reason. So this is to give you a better idea of what the monitor hypothesis could look like if we were to overuse it, underuse it, or use it just correctly, right? So as you're reading, if you said, what if what I what if I told you that read what if I told you that you read wrong, that, right? Overuse. I'm correcting myself too much, right? I'm repeatedly having to go over things, right? I'm stopping to talk. My speech is slow. I'm not confident. I'm hard to understand because I'm not getting my point across fast enough. With second language learners, someone who might be overusing that monitor will sound like that. And if that was you, now you have an example of, oh, I know what this is like. If you were to underuse it, you might just say, what I have told you, you that read wrong, that awkward when you realize when you read wrong too, the moment after awkward. right? It doesn't make any sense. I'm going fast, I'm saying all the words, but the grammar isn't there, right? And I might be convinced that I'm saying the right things, but other people won't be picking up, right? The listener won't be hearing what I'm saying and having it make sense to them. Whereas if you were to use the monitor just right, it would sound more like, what if I told you that you read this wrong? That you're awkward, and when you read something wrong, it makes the whole thing and the moment after awkward too, right? Was that word for word what was on that text? No, but I got my point across. I was understandable. I did correct myself a little bit, but you guys could all get the general gist of what I was saying. And that would be the proper use of the monitor. So, this is to give you an idea of what it may sound like or what it may look like in a hands-on perspective of one of your students that might be overusing or underusing that monitor. And that's so you can better see when that is happening. So, to finish this off, hopefully I didn't go over my 2 questions. We discussed the monitor hypothesis. Now I'd like you to try to come up with a metaphor for this monitor. For an example, like I thought of when I learned about the monitor, the role our conscious, like our guilty conscious, like a Jiminy Cricket kind of thing, right? And how when it's always watching our actions and judging our actions, and are like, oh, was this good? Was this bad? Was this good? Was this bad? And it's similar, right? If you are overly conscious or conscientious, you might apologize too often and correct yourself too often, and vice versa. If you don't have that conscious, you might act out. You might not. You might have a lack of control. People might not understand you as well, right? So I want you to come up with your own metaphor. Try to figure out your own metaphor that helps you understand this monitor, and relate it back. And how does it help you better understand how the monitor hypothesis works? And my second question is for feedback. Why don't we use a previously used method in class with the 2 roses and 1 thorn? So, find 2 roses you liked about my presentation, find 1 thorn you didn't. But either way, I hope you enjoyed it. I worked hard on it, and I'll finish this off with a silent little look of my citations.